Rachel boarded late. Not because she was running behind, but because she always preferred to walk in last. Less attention that way. She moved with quiet steps, her sneakers soundless on the boarding bridge, her hoodie slightly faded, and a canvas bag hugged to her side. Looked like she'd owned that bag for a decade. Probably had. She made her way to seat 9A, nodding politely to a flight attendant who didn't notice her. The business class section was already mostly full. Suits typing away on laptops, a few influencers recording clips before takeoff, and a handful of families with tired expressions. Rachel slid into her window seat without a word. The man in 9B, tall, loud, wearing a designer tracksuit and oversized headphones, glanced at her and made a face, not rude but dismissive. She gave a soft, closed-lipped smile, but he was already turning back to his phone. She tucked her bag under the seat in front of her and looked out the window. Her fingers drummed softly against the armrest. She wasn't nervous. She was calculating. Outside, the sky had already begun to thicken. Not full storm yet, but clouds were stacking, brooding over the tarmac like they knew something was coming. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. Routine stuff. Flight 472 from Anchorage to Tokyo. Expected arrival 13 hours later. Light turbulence forecasted over the Aleutians. Rachel's eyes flicked up. Light turbulence? She already knew better. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked back on with a soft ding. A ripple of discomfort passed through the cabin. The lights dimmed just slightly, and the plane dipped. A small, sharp drop. Not violent. Not yet. Before we continue, please do subscribe to my channel. The woman across the aisle adjusted her red scarf and muttered something to her husband. He gave her a placating nod and took a sip of scotch. Rachel didn't speak, but she turned to the flight attendant. Walking down the aisle, blonde curls. Pinned tight, name tag reading Cindy. Rachel's voice was low, calm. Is the pressure dropping? Cindy paused, forced a practiced smile. Ma'am, please stay seated. Let the professionals handle it. Rachel nodded once, still calm. She didn't argue. She just turned back to the window. The man in the tracksuit beside her snorted. You, a pilot or something? He asked, sarcasm heavy in his voice. Rachel didn't look at him. The plane shuddered again, slight but undeniable. The murmurs began, passengers whispering, eyes darting. Feels like it's getting worse.
Is this
normal? Rachel didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady on the clouds. The guy in 9B leaned in, smirking. Yo, if we crash, you gonna fly us down in your hoodie, Wonder Woman? His friend across the aisle laughed. Rachel didn't answer. Instead, her hands moved slowly, methodically opening her canvas bag just slightly, like she was checking. Something inside. A woman 2 rows back. Flawless makeup, high heels. And a perfume trail that stretched across half the cabin, leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Excuse me, she called out, voice sharp as glass. Can you not make people nervous with your amateur commentary? Some of us paid for comfort, not suspense. A few people chuckled nervously. Rachel adjusted her glasses, didn't respond. Cindy, now returning up the aisle, looked uncomfortable. Her pleasant smile had vanished, replaced by tight professionalism. She stopped briefly at row 9, glanced at Rachel, then said curtly, Please keep calm. You're worrying the other passengers. Rachel's voice was low, but steady. I'm not the one shaking the plane. That line hit the air like a cold gust. Cindy blinked, said nothing, kept walking. Now, more eyes were on Rachel, a middle-aged woman in a bright pink cardigan leaned over from across the aisle, smiling like she was handing out cupcakes. Honey, she cooed. You seem sweet, but maybe just let the crew do their job, okay? This isn't the time to be brave. Her husband, balding and sunburned, glanced down at Rachel's sneakers. Yeah, he muttered. No offense, but you don't exactly look like someone we should trust with anything. The words didn't sting. They bounced. Rachel's fingers paused on her bag for a brief moment, then resumed, counting in her head. Maybe seconds. Maybe breaths. Another shake. Harder, the kind that drops stomachs. A small boy toward the back screamed, then whimpered into his mother's coat. The engines hummed louder now, wind buffing the fuselage with distant growls. Someone gasped. Someone else prayed under their breath. The man in the polo shirt, confident, loud, stood up fast and jabbed a finger at Rachel. "Hey, you're freaking out my kid with this pilot act. Wait, sit down and shut up." His wife tugged his sleeve, but he shook her off. "I'm serious. This ain't a movie, lady. You think you know better than the crew?" Rachel turned slightly, met his glare. "No, I just know what this is." A silence fell across a 6-seat radius. Only the engine spoke now. The tracksuit guy leaned closer again, laughing under his breath. "What, you going to fix the storm? Whether a whisper or something?" Laughs were weaker this time. Not everyone was laughing anymore. Rachel opened her bag further. Inside was a small, dog-eared notebook. Leather-bound, worn edges. She opened it. Her fingers tracing one of the pages slowly, not reading, just remembering. The woman in the pink cardigan watched with a smirk. Oh, perfect. She's writing. Her memoir, maybe title it Hero in row 9. Laughter again. Psst. But now fewer joined in. The plane dropped again, a heavy thud that rattled the overhead bins. A baby cried. The lights flickered once. Rachel didn't move, but her grip on the notebook tightened. Her jaw clenched, not out of fear, but restraint. She was holding something back, and whatever it was big. The cabin lights dimmed again, not by design, but by another electrical flicker. Gasps filled the aisles, and nervous passengers clutched their armrests. Captain Reeves' voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're experiencing some unexpected systems malfunctions. Please remain seated and calm. We're working on it." Marina's fingers stayed wrapped tightly around the seatbelt buckle, but her mind was far from the turbulence. It was locked on the sound she'd just heard, the system's alert. Coded failure she remembered from her time. Flying classified missions. She twisted in her seat and spoke firmly to the flight attendant. "Now crouched in the galley, you need to tell the cockpit they're not just dealing with turbulence. That alert meant a mainframe cascade failure. The backup electrical system might be failing too." The attendant blinked, stunned. "How would you even?" Marina exhaled. "Because I used to fly these birds. I'm not just a passenger." Row 9 wasn't silent anymore. The man seated beside her, Mr. Callahan, who had earlier dismissed her with a scoff, now looked at her differently. "You flew these before?" he asked cautiously. Marina nodded. "Military background. Call sign, Monarch. I wasn't just a pilot. I was on the engineering test team that evaluated this aircraft's failsafes." That silenced him. Others were listening too now. The woman in row 10 leaned forward, whispering urgently, "Is this plane going to crash?" "No," Marina said calmly, her voice steady as ever. "But only if we fix what's failing. I think the cockpit doesn't realize the extent yet." She stood up. "You can't stand right now," the same flight attendant protested, panicked. "Have to, or they won't know what's about to fail next." As she moved slowly toward the front, the turbulence jostled the aircraft harder. Someone yelped in the back. Luggage bins rattled above. A large man in business class blocked her way. "Where do you think you're going?" Marina didn't flinch. "To keep this aircraft in the sky," he sneered. "What are you, some flight sim geek with a Pinterest pilot badge?" She pulled out her old military ID badge, the one she hadn't shown in years. It was slightly worn, but still bore her full name and rank. LT, Commander Marina Holt, U.S. Navy Tactical Air Division. The man stepped aside. When Marina finally reached the cockpit door, the co-pilot opened it slightly, peering out with tight nerves. "And please return to your seat." Marina leaned close and whispered one word, her call sign, Monarch. The pilot inside, Captain Reeves, froze, then slowly stood. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Let her in," he said immediately. Inside, the flight deck was a whirlwind of flashing red indicators and confusion. "I heard the alerts," Marina said, scanning the diagnostics display. "Your electrical bus is overloading and bleeding into avionics. Standby system is corrupted. You've got 10 minutes, maybe less, before you lose nav control." Captain Reeves moved aside. What do you suggest? Switch to emergency protocol, Zulu 11. That'll bypass the corrupted grid and run all priority systems off the auxiliary turbine. The younger co-pilot blinked. That's not in our manual. Marina looked at him. Wouldn't be. It was classified protocol for test pilots during prototype evaluation. You do it, or you lose guidance entirely. Captain Reeves nodded slowly. Let her work. Back in the cabin, no one could see what was unfolding behind the cockpit door. But they could feel something had changed. The woman in row 9, once ignored, was now steering the fate of 200 lives through sky and storm. The cockpit air had grown heavy. Even with oxygen flowing, every breath felt loaded with silent prayers. Captain Reeves handed Marina the co-pilot's headset as she slid into the second seat. What else are we missing? He asked her, hands trembling slightly. Marina scanned the displays. Switch off avionics bus 3 entirely. Route it through. The auxiliary turbine feed, but only once you stabilize the left rudder servo. The young co-pilot hesitated. That could cut off our ILs if we re-enter airspace. Marina nodded calmly. But it'll keep us airborne. Without a rudder, you'll drift into stall on descent.
Trust me, I ran this in simulators for years.
Reeves said softly, Are you sure about all this? She turned to him with a small, focused smile. I didn't sit in row 9 today by accident. I booked this flight because this exact aircraft model was scheduled. My gut said something wasn't right. Looks like my gut was right. She leaned forward and started keying in commands into the onboard maintenance interface, moving with speed and certainty. It was as if her hands remembered before her mind even needed to. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the change not visually, but in their bones. The rough turbulence that had been shaking trays and fraying nerves began to smooth out. A mother cradling her baby in row 21 looked around cautiously. Is it getting better? She whispered. Row 9's Mr. Callahan, who had doubted Marina from the start, now found himself sitting straighter, listening for every mechanical whir and shift. He watched the closed cockpit door like a gate to destiny. Even the flight attendants, who had previously been panicked and scattered, stood taller now. One whispered, She's in there. The woman from row 9, and they let her sit in the pilot seat. Who is she? Someone asked. I don't know, the attendant replied. But she's not just some passenger. Inside the cockpit, Marina's focus never wavered, but her heart wasn't silent. Images flashed through her mind, her last flight in uniform, metal placed quietly on her bedside while she lay recovering from that crash. Her discharge papers, the therapist's words, You're not broken. Morenci had stepped away from the sky not because she couldn't fly, but because no one believed she should again, until now. Until today, she took a deep breath. Oh, power diverted. Avionics routing stable. GPS backup link online. You're flying again. Captain Reeves looked at her with awe. Ma'am, you just saved this bird. Is the aircraft finally leveled? Into smooth, still air, the radio crackled again. Delta 4721. This is Salt Lake approach. We've been trying to reach you. You've vanished off radar for 4 minutes. What is your status? Captain Reeves reached for the mic, then paused. He looked at Marina. She took the headset. Salt Lake. This is Monarch on Delta 4721. Aircraft stabilized after partial nav and power failure. Backup systems rerouted. Preparing for manual vector approach. Confirm coordinates and runway availability. Long silence then. Monarch, as in Commander Holt. Confirming runway 34L. You're cleared priority. Emergency response teams are en route. Marina smiled faintly. Affirmative. Let's bring them home. In row 9, her empty seat remained still, but the passengers around it no longer looked annoyed by her. They looked toward the cockpit with reverence because now they knew the woman they'd ignored was their only reason this flight was still in the air, and for the first time in years, Marina Holt flew not to escape her past, but to reclaim it. The aircraft coasted through calm air now, but the challenges were far from over. The backup navigation system was functioning, but only barely. Their landing gear wasn't yet responding to the normal commands. Marina sat with her jaw clenched, checking system diagnostics and eyeing the terrain on a flickering screen, Captain Reeves said. Salt Lake's prepared emergency foam on the tarmac. Marina shook her head. That won't matter if we can't drop gear. We'll skid in sparks. Reeves looked at her. So what now? She inhaled deeply, eyes sharp. Gear override. It's manual. We do it old school. He blinked. You mean crank it? Mid-flight. She nodded. I need someone from the crew to assist Belodeck. They buzzed the senior attendant. The same man who had earlier questioned Marina now stood before her. Pale and uncertain, I need you to access the hydraulic hatch behind Galley 3. Use the crank. 5 full turns counterclockwise, 3 right. It's buried under a panel. Fast. The man looked ready to argue, then simply nodded and ran. There was something in her voice now that turned doubt into obedience. Back in the cabin, whispers filled the aisle. That woman. She's not just flying us. She's leading. Everyone, did you hear what the pilot said? Monarch. That's a military call sign, isn't it? Someone looked up Marina Holt on their phone. Weak Wi-Fi had finally returned, and a cached article opened slowly. Gasps rippled through the rows. She's the one who crash-landed the F-39 after. An EMP strike. Everyone thought she was dead. She flew that mission over the Andes, remember? Saved a whole recon team. The skeptics turned silent. Even Callahan in row 9 looked down at his lap, shame on his face. He whispered to no one. We ignored her. An elderly woman leaned over to him. You didn't just ignore her. You doubted her, and she's saving your life now. Beneath the cabin, inside the plane's lower mechanical area, the flight attendant sweated and struggled with the crank. 1 turn, 2, then 3. Nothing. Marina's voice buzzed in on the internal radio. Check pressure gauge. Should rise above 20. He grunted, turned again. Nothing. Then reverse. You may be cross-threaded. Fast. He abandoned. Suddenly, the cabin trembled slightly. Outside, the left landing gear unfolded halfway with a groan of mechanical resistance. Marina checked the readings. Left. Down. Now the right. After a tense minute, both gears were confirmed deployed, though slightly misaligned. Not perfect, but good enough to land. Marina exhaled. Captain Reeves shook his head in disbelief. You're doing the impossible. She didn't reply. Her hands were already adjusting for approach. The sky ahead was turning dusky violet. Sunset just in time, altitude holding at 9,000. Descent begins now. As the city spread beneath them like a sleepy quilt of lights and shadows, the plane descended, the airspeed reduced. And the runway lights became visible, a brilliant strip of hope. Salt Lake. We're final on 34L, Marina said softly. Copy Monarch, rescue, and foam units in position. The cabin fell completely silent. No babies cried. No engines hummed too loud, just breath. And hope. Marina's voice was steady. Gear down. Flaps 30. Manual thrust assist. The tires hit the tarmac with a scream. Sparks flew briefly from the right gear, but the plane held. Then rolled hard. Reverse thrust engaged. The aircraft slowed. The fire teams followed as foam flooded under the chassis. When the plane finally halted, silence held for a heartbeat longer. Then the cabin erupted. Applause, sobs. Some stood, some hugged. And one man, the same man from row 9 who had scoffed, stood up, trembling, and whispered, She landed us. She brought us home. Marina took off the headset slowly, sat up, looked out at the dusk light brushing the wingtip. Her reflection in the cockpit window was just a woman, tired, quiet, but back where she belonged. Captain Reeves extended a hand. Commander Holt, that was the finest flying I've ever seen. She shook it, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Thank you, Captain, she replied. Let's meet the people we saved. And as she stepped out of the cockpit into the aisle where hours earlier she'd been brushed aside, passengers stood. One by one, not in protest, but in respect. The radio crackled again. Monarch, Salt Lake, approach. You are cleared direct. Vector 110, at 10,000 feet. Winds calm. Emergency landing protocols are in effect. Ground crews standing by. Marina gripped the yoke with practiced ease. Beside her, Captain Reeves was silent, watching, absorbing, and slowly realizing that this wasn't just an emergency. It was history repeating itself in the best way possible. "Roger that, Salt Lake," she said. "We are descending gradually, prepping for a full manual approach." Behind the cockpit, the cabin lights flickered slightly as systems rerouted. Power! One last time, then steady glow. The flight was descending, but there was no panic now. Just awe and trust in the cabin. News had spread like fire. The mysterious woman from row 9 was not only flying the plane, she was saving it. Passengers, who had never spoken to each other, were now murmuring prayers, sharing looks of quiet solidarity. A few openly wept not from fear, but from sheer emotional release. A teen boy leaned toward the aisle and whispered to the man across from him, "My dad says she used to be a top pilot." He recognized her voice from a military podcast. Her call. Sin was Monarch. The man nodded slowly. "She's the real deal." Flight attendant Naomi made her way up the aisle to reassure everyone, her voice stronger now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Salt Lake City. Please remain seated and trust the crew. We are in capable hands." She paused at row 9, glanced at the empty seat, and whispered, "Thank you." Inside the cockpit, the landscape began to shift. Clouds parted. The distant twinkle of the city lights shimmered beneath them. Captain Reeves swallowed hard. What if the rudder servo collapses again during the turn? "It won't," Marina replied softly, eyes locked ahead. "But if it does, we feather left throttle, trim the elevator, and touch down 2 degrees of axis." "Well, you're right." "Naturally. Trust me," he nodded, breath held. She eased the plane down, nose lowered, with the grace of a bird finding its nest. At 5,000 feet, landing gear deployed. The groan of the hydraulics was followed by a confident green light on the panel. A tear rolled down her cheek, unnoticed by anyone but herself. Not out of fear, not from exhaustion, but because she was home in the cockpit, where she always belonged. As the wheels kissed the runway with a soft thunk, cheers erupted from the cabin. Not wild, hysterical screams, but a rising wave of claps and sobs.
Ow.
Kind of applause that came not from relief, but reverence. The plane slowed. Marina gently turned the aircraft toward the emergency runway apron, where flashing lights of ambulances and fire trucks waited. No one needed them. They had her. As the engines powered down and the plane came to a full stop, Marina finally leaned back in her seat. The headset slid off. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but released. Captain Reeves reached over, voice thick. "You should have been flying all this time." She gave him a tired smile. "They grounded me after the crash. But maybe. I was never really meant to stay grounded," he smiled. "They won't dare keep you off the skies now." When the cabin doors finally opened, the passengers didn't rush out. Instead, they waited, forming a quiet aisle down the center of the plane. And when Marina finally stepped out from the cockpit, her hair tied back, her eyes still sharp, silence fell. Then one person began to clap, and another, then another. Soon the entire plane was applauding, standing, clapping. Some crying row 9 seat sat quietly beside her. Someone had placed a napkin on it, with handwritten words. "To the woman in row 9, you weren't just our passenger, you were our captain. Thank you." The tarmac buzzed with activity. Emergency crews, safety officers, and airline representatives swarmed Monarch 217 like bees to a disturbed hive, but no chaos, just procedure.com. Reverence.Marina stood to the side of the aircraft, watching as passengers disembarked. Many pausing to look back at her. Few stopped, shook her hand, whispered thanks. Some just placed their hands over their hearts and nodded. Her uniform, wrinkled from hours of tension, seemed like the only fabric in the world that fit her again, even though it wasn't official, just a crew jacket handed to her by Naomi Shea. Wore it like armor. A man in a gray suit approached her. "Captain Strand," he asked. She looked up. "Not officially. Not anymore. Not anymore." He extended his hand. I'm FAA Inspector Ray Hollow. I'll be leading the initial review. Her shoulders squared, and I assume you want my statement. We do. But before that, he looked at the grounded aircraft, then back at her. I want to thank you. Everyone walked off that plane today. She nodded. That's all I wanted. In a quiet conference room inside the Salt Lake terminal, Marina sat alone for a moment, sipping black coffee. It tasted metal-soon. A panel of airline officials and FAA investigators filed in. Captain Reeves entered last and sat beside her. Lead investigator began. First of all, we want to acknowledge your role in safely landing Monarch 217. Your actions were extraordinary. Marina gave a small, polite nod, but the man continued. We need to address how a civilian one whose license was marked inactive came to be in the cockpit of a commercial airliner. Captain Reeves spoke up. With respect, if she hadn't been in that cockpit, we'd be running a very different investigation. It's probably at the crash site of Monarch 217. The room fell silent. Marina folded her hands. I didn't force my way up there. I was asked. Your pilots were incapacitated. There was no other option. And your experience, your military record checks out, said Hallow, leafing through a file. Your call sign Monarch appears in over 24 confirmed sorties. Honors. But I crashed, she finished. I froze. Took a bad hit. People died. That doesn't erase what happened. He paused. But it doesn't erase today either. The data came in quickly. Flight recorders confirmed the initial failure of the control systems. Then the stunning precision with which someone not even on the manifest as crude control of the aircraft stabilized its descent, rerouted to a safe airport, and landed with minimal fuel and limited avionics. When the flight transcript was played back, Marina's calm, focused voice filled the room. Altitude holding, trim left, adjust flaps. Captain, focus on the manual throttle. Silence. Then cheers from the passengers. I'd like to submit something, Captain Reeves said, sliding a signed document forward. This is a formal recommendation to reinstate Marina Strand's license, not just as a civilian pilot, but commercial. Marina stared at the paper. She hadn't dared to hope. 3 days later, Marina stood at a window in a quiet hotel suite, watching planes rise and fall outside Salt Lake City. International, her phone buzzed. It was a number she hadn't seen in years. She answered. Strand, came a gravelly voice. This is Colonel Reyes. We heard what you did. Her breath caught. Sir, you made us proud. We're working on a full honors restoration of your service record. She blinked fast. I thought they scrubbed all that. They did. But sometimes the past deserves a second hearing. Paused. And there's more. A certain airline CEO wants to meet you. They're interested in making you their senior training captain. Her hand trembled as she held the phone. The call ended, and she stood still. The city lights flickering on below her like a million. Runway lights. The sky hadn't closed its doors on her. It had just waited for her return. Marina stood before her. Hotel Mir, fingers hesitating over the collar of her newly issued airline uniform. The navy blue fabric was fresh, crisp. A single set of gold wings gleamed on her chest. They had sent it to her overnight, along with a note that read, Welcome back, Captain Strand. This time not as a passenger. She stared at herself for a long while. Gone were the combat boots, the olive flight suit, the burnished squadron patch of years ago, but something else remains, something deeper. The resolve in her eyes hadn't aged. When she stepped out of the room, her gait had changed. There was no limp, no weight on her shoulders, only the sound of purpose returning at Monarch. Airline's training facility, a sleek simulator sat ready inside a private hangar. It was the same model as the aircraft she'd landed. She entered with quiet confidence, where a room of executives and senior pilots turned at once to greet her. At the center stood CEO Dalton Furtha, former pilot himself with silver at his temples and old turbulence in his eyes. He walked over, extended his hand. Captain Strand. I've been waiting to shake your hand since the second I heard your call sign. Marina grasped it firmly. Thank you, sir. Let me be honest. He said, Our board thinks hiring a grounded pilot with a ghost in her past is risky. But you're not just a hero. You're exactly what aviation needs right now, heart, instinct, and no tolerance for protocol over people. He gestured to the simulator. We're starting a leadership program. Mentorship for women, for veterans, for anyone overlooked. You'd be our first. Marina's voice was soft but steady. You'll promise perfection, but I'll show up for them. Dalton smiled. Well, that's all the sky ever asks. That evening, Marina did something she hadn't planned. She went back to the airport not to fly, but to find someone in the arrivals hall. Scanned the crowd until she spotted a young woman sitting cross-legged on a bench, near baggage claims, catchpad in hand. Headphones on, DOA delling. The teen looked up, and her eyes lit up in disbelief. You found me? She asked, blinking in awe. I said I would, Marina replied. Did you? Finish the story? Amelia reached into her backpack and pulled out a thick sketchbook. It's not just a comic anymore. It's a whole graphic novel. It's called Monarch 217. Want to see? Marina sat beside her. Page after page showed panels of a nervous teen on a plane, a mysterious woman in row 9, a crisis. And then, transformation. The artwork was raw but pulsing with truth. I drew you like a superhero, Amelia whispered, but the kind with scars. Marina smiled. That's the only kind that matters. The teen hesitated, then asked, Do you think I could ever learn to fly? For real? Marina looked at her like a captain seeing a trainee for the first time. Don't think, she said softly. I know. Weeks later, the cockpit door sealed, the engines rumbled to life. Marina sat in the left seat, the captain's seat. Beside her, a younger co-pilot fresh, Agur adjusted his headset. You sure you're ready? He asked with a grin. Marina glanced through the windshield as the runway came into view. I've never been more ready. As the aircraft accelerated, she felt the nose lift. The wheels left the ground. That old sensation washed over her, not adrenaline, not nerves, just release. And high above the clouds, where silence was soft and the sun always shone, a woman once broken by the sky flew. Steady once again, but this time with purpose. With story, the eyes wide open, the buzz started with a blurry photo. Marina standing beside the teen girl at the airport, Amelia's sketchbook clutched between them. Someone snapped the shot and uploaded it with the caption, The Mystery Woman. From Monarch Flight 217 is a real-life pilot and a hero. Within hours, blogs picked it up by morning. A national news channel requested a sit-down interview. At first, Marina declined. She hadn't come back to fly for attention. She wasn't looking for applause. But something Amelia said stayed with her. Some people out there need to know someone like you exists, just so they don't give up. So she said yes. The studio lights were blinding. The interviewer, all polished charm, leaned forward and asked, Captain Strand, what made you get up from row 9 and take command when no one asked you to? Marina took a long breath. Because I recognized the signs. I remembered what it feels like to have people assume you're just background. She looked directly into the camera. And because I believe that sometimes the right thing to do doesn't need permission. The segment aired in over 20 countries. Suddenly, #row9 trended worldwide. A week later, Marina's old squadron leader called her Strand. His gruff voice said, You've gone viral. You're even on base news? She chuckled. Not sure how I feel about that. Well, the Air Force feels pretty good. They want to honor you. Invite you to speak at the academy. Marina paused. She hadn't been on a base in years. Are you sure they want me? Strand, the cadets need you. They're learning checklists and equations, but you remind them what leadership actually looks like. A lump rose in her throat. Later, when she stood in front of 100 fresh-faced cadets, many of them women, many of them wide-eyed and wondering if they had what it took, she told them the truth. About fear, about silence, about sitting in row 9, until you couldn't anymore. There was one person Marina hadn't heard from since that fateful flight captain Lyle, the pilot whose panic attack had forced her to act. She didn't expect a message, but it came. A simple email. Captain Strand, I owe you everything. He froze. You didn't. If you're ever back in LA, I'd like to meet. So she did. They sat at a quiet diner near the coast. Lyle looked older than she remembered, tired but humbled. I've stepped away from flying, he confessed. For now, getting help. Therapy. It's slow, but I'm facing it. Marina nodded. That takes guts. I watched your interview. He said, at first I was ashamed. Right. But then I realized what you didn't shame me. It saved me. She met his eyes. No one talks about what it means when a pilot breaks, but they should. There's no shame in needing help. There's only danger in silence. He reached across the table. Thank you for not letting us crash. 6 months passed, and one afternoon, Marina stood on a dusty airstrip at a private flight school. She watched Emilian, now 16, climb into the seat of a 2-seater trainer plane. Her hands were steady, her braid tucked under her headset. She looked back once at Marina and gave a thumbs up. You ready, cadet? The instructor beside her asked. Amelia grinned. I was born ready. The propeller spun to life. As the plane lifted off the runway, wobbling a little but finding balance, Marina's eyes stung. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the girls who saw her, the stories that soared, because she stayed in the sky just long enough for others to rise. It was a rainy Thursday evening when someone knocked. Marina opened the door to find a tall woman in a dark military coat, rain beating off her cap. Her uniform bore no name, just a patch, a silver falcon diving through clouds. Captain Strand? The woman asked. Marina instinctively straightened. Yes, I'm with the DoD Special Coordination Office. We're assembling a civilian. Response, Shadow Protocol. The flight crew call it Whiskey Echo. It's classified. You're on our list. Marina frowned. List for what? For pilots with nerves of steel and no ego, who know when to lead, even if no one asks them. 2. The woman handed over a sealed envelope. You can say no. But if you say yes, we'll need you ready in 24 hours. Inside the envelope was a single sentence. When conventional chains of command collapse, you will respond. No rank, no orders. Only resolve. Alongside it, a small card. Her old Air Force call sign reactivated. Wine Marina sat with it for hours. Was this what her entire life had prepared her for? She wasn't sure she had it in her again, till she remembered the mother on Flight 217 gripping her toddler, the teenage girl clutching her sketchbook, the trembling hands of a junior co-pilot. The world was getting more unstable by the year. Cyber attacks, technical malfunctions, ground crews overwhelmed, and sometimes there just wouldn't be enough time for bureaucracy. So she picked up her phone. I accept. She told the voice on the other end. There was a pause, then welcome. 2 Whiskey Echo, Eagle 9. Weeks later, Marina boarded another commercial flight, not as the pilot. Not as a passenger, really. She sat in row 9 again, window seat, just like before. But this time, she wasn't invisible. The flight attendant noticed her instantly. You're the woman from the video, she whispered. From Flight 217, Marina smiled faintly. That's me. The attendant leaned closer, then said with a grin, just so you know, it's crew trained with your footage. You're part of our manuals now. Marina blinked.
What do you mean? Passenger intervention?
Scenarios. They call it the Strand Protocol. She chuckled, shaking her head. That's ridiculous. The attendant winked. Ridiculously brave, ma'am. At sunrise, months later, Marina stood once more in an empty hangar. This one had no control tower, just her, a small plane, and the hum of something bigger rising. In the world, she strapped into her old gear. In her earpiece, a familiar tone buzzed. The encrypted frequency of the Whiskey Echo network. Her call sign lit green on the screen. Eagle 9 Activia voice she didn't recognize. Calm and sure, spoke. Strand. It's a flight out of Lisbon in trouble. Auto systems glitching. One pilot down, the others barely holding on. They're 43 minutes from Heathrow. We're dispatching a shadow. You're the closest asset. Are you ready? Marina looked to the sky. Clear, endless. She pressed the mic. Whiskey Echo. Eagle. 9, wheels up. And just like that, she took off. A quiet force in a chaotic world. For every flight in trouble, for every voice in the dark, for every girl who once sat silent in row 9, wondering if she mattered, she was the answer now. The call had come at 3:47 m. Flight 772 from Lisbon to Heathrow had suffered a cascading failure. Navigation erasure. Eagle 9, Marina, flew above the cloud line now, her small aircraft cruising close to Flight 772. Her eyes flicked across instruments pressure. Pitch wind churl burned into her muscle memory from years of experience. She opened a line on the secure relay channel. "This is Eagle 9. I have visual." "Who's flying?" Shaky voice responded. "Second Officer Liam Torvel. I'm trying." He was trying too hard. She could hear it in every breath. "Liam," she said softly, her voice a bomb in the Pawnee. There was a pause, then a breathy. "I see you. Good," Marina said. "You're doing fine. Now let me fly with you, okay?" Bit by bit, she talked him through stabilization. "Ease your nose up by 2 degrees. Don't fight the plane dance with it. She wants to fly. Trust her." His breathing slowed. The erratic dips stopped. "See that? It's you? That's your hands telling her you're in charge?" He chuckled nervously. "You sound like my flight instructor." Only calmer. Marina grinned. Probably older, too. 26 minutes later, Flight 772 descended safely into Heathrow's airspace. Marina peeled off just as the airport's shadow crew intercepted the flight. Liam radioed one last time. "Eagle 9. If you hadn't been there?" Marina responded. Firm but kind. "You did it, Liam. I was just a whisper in your ear." But what followed shook her. "They'll never forget you, ma'am." Row 9 became the safest seat on the plane the moment you sat down. Marina landed her own plane, far from the spotlight. She didn't want applause. She never had, but in airports around the world. Whispered stories followed her, a mysterious woman who once took control when the cockpit failed, the unnamed passenger who saved hundreds by calmly whispering code to the crew, the one they now called. The woman in row 9, airlines rewrote training manuals. Her methods became part of aviation safety modules. Pilots referred to her story like legend, equal parts, myth, and manual. But to Marina, it was never about legacy. It was about making sure that when chaos reared its head again, anyone would step up, not because of a title, not because of authority, but because they could, on a quiet afternoon. A young black woman boarded Flight 306. She wore a pin on her blazer. A silver falcon diving through clouds, seat 9A. She sat down with practiced ease. The passenger beside her glanced over. "Flying for work?" She smiled. "No," she said softly. "I'm just listening." And outside the plane, above the sky, a legacy circled in scene, but never absent. Because in a world that often ignores the quiet ones in row 9, they forget. Too quickly, that silence doesn't mean powerless, and calm doesn't mean weak. Sometimes, it's the woman in row 9 is the last voice you'll hear, the only one that can save you. The end. The end.